Welcome. In this section, we examine model merging through the nDNA lens, but with a twist. Instead of fusing variants from the same lineage, we create hybrids by merging cross-cultural models drawn from 8 culturally tuned LLMs: Asia, Africa, Australia, Europe, China, the Middle East, North America, and Latin America. We use a divergence-aware, layer-wise interpolation so the merge respects where the parents disagree most, and then read the child's semantic helix, its nDNA. We call it a neural marriage because two distinct, culturally trained lineages are joined layer by layer to produce a child whose traits are inherited, recombined. The offspring, an ÄTHER, reflects a fused but non-trivial manifold, a cognitive entity with latent features that are emergent, inherited, or suppressed. We chose the name ÄTHER because, in myth and science lore, ÄTHER is the subtle medium that carries light and connects distant bodies. By analogy, our hybrids live in a shared latent medium that lets priors flow between architectures, so their children inherit, recombine, and evolve. Future generations of these hybrid offspring are ÄTHERs, models born in that medium, carrying blended cultural and architectural DNA. And it's a quiet tribute to the physicists Maxwell, Lorentz, Michelson, Morley, and Einstein, whose work transformed how we think about ÄTHER. We borrow the term metaphorically, a computational medium where cultural priors mingle and hybrid models inherit, recombine, and evolve. nDNA lets us track inheritance the way a biologist would. Across cultures and architectures, the questions are simple and deep. Who sets the backbone of the manifold? Where does blending help, and where does it break? Can we breed for resilience without washing out identity? What follows is a first atlas of cross-cultural, neural offspring, family trees drawn in latent space, so we can design mergers that don't just average voices, but learn the path of inheritance and evolution. Once central to 19th century physics yet discarded by Einstein's theory of relativity, the luminiferous ÄTHER endures as a poetic ancestor of the intuition that something fills the space and that act as a medium to light. A metaphor people loosely connect to today's ideas of cosmology, dark particles, and dark energy. Although discarded long back, a few theorists do explore Lorentz violating Einstein ÄTHER models, even today. Here is a brief look at the historical idea of ÄTHER. A full documentary is linked on our website. Drawing only on the metaphor and the inspiration from physics, we use the term ÄTHER to metaphorically denote a computational medium of transport for artificial cognition in the AI evolution, a shared latent space where priors mingle and hybrid models inherit, recombine, and evolve.
Was a 19th century idea that has soundly been rejected by evidence. Then how is it that there are still physicists working on ÄTHER theory? And indeed, a new paper seems to come out on this every couple of weeks. Little Albert is understandably very confused, but I have answers. ÄTHER is a Greek word that roughly means fresh air. It was supposedly what the gods were breathing up in the heavens as they were debating where the next lightning bolt should land. The word was later used among scientists to refer to a medium that filled all of space and that allowed forces to travel from one place to another.
Merging multiple LLMs has recently attracted significant research attention. Practically, it offers a fast, cost and carbon-efficient way to compose strengths across domain-tuned and safety-tuned checkpoints, recover capabilities without full retraining, and tailor models to deployment constraints, on-device, data siloed, or IP-bounded settings. Let's look at the model merging preambles and hypotheses for our experiments. We see model merging as epistemic recombination. We marry culturally fine-tuned models, Asian with African or Latin American with Chinese, each carrying distinct neural DNA trajectories across layers, spectral curvature, thermodynamic length, and culture-conditioned belief vectors. We don't average weights, we recombine structures. The offspring, an ÄTHER, is a fused yet non-trivial manifold whose traits can be inherited, emergent, or suppressed. Using nDNA, we ask, who sets the backbone, where does blending help, and where does identity begin to crack? So, mathematically, inheritance can be described as 3 per-layer deviations we read in plain language. Spectral curvature gap at layer L. Let's read the child's spectral curvature at layer L and subtract the parent's average curvature at that layer. Positive drift means the child bends more, that is either recombination or tension. Negative drift denotes the child smooths or flattens. Thermodynamics length gap at layer L. If we read the child's thermodynamic length at layer L and subtract the parent's average length. Positive drift means more semantic effort than the parent's average. Negative drift means a cheaper shortcut. Inheritance deviation at layer L. Take the child's belief vector at layer L, subtract the average of the two parents' belief vectors at that same layer, and measure the size of that difference. Small drift indicates simple averaging. Large drift denotes a new feature or a tilt toward one parent. Together, these derivations provide a clear readout of neural inheritance, seldom symmetric or smooth, instead structured, biased, and semantically charged. Inheritance isn't replication, it's emergence through recombination. In LLMs, the birth of an ÄTHER is the birth of a new epistemic possibility. Why this is new? Most work on cultural bias audits outputs, stereotype counts, regional sentiment drift, factual inconsistencies. Useful, but they diagnose symptoms and then patch with prompts or demographic reweighting, treating culture as a peripheral constraint to be fixed post hoc. ÄTHER is a step change. It interrogates the model's representational genome, the internal epistemic structures that store, abstract, and prioritize knowledge. By tracing semantic inheritance inside merged models, ÄTHER shows not just what a model says, but how it comes to believe it. This shift, from behaviorist auditing to cognitive anatomy, opens a new frontier. Culture is no longer a label on the output, but a latent geometry shaping the manifold of machine cognition. To examine how culturally grounded priors interact inside the representation space, we simulate neural marriage, pairwise merging of ethnic LLMs trained on distinct regional corpora, producing offspring models, neural hybrids born from entangled epistemic lineages. We use Fisher-weighted averaging, FWA, as the primary fusion rule. Intuitively, for every parameter, multiply each parent's value by its Fisher importance from a diagonal Fisher information matrix that marks ՀЭTHER salient directions, add the two, and divide by the summed importances plus a small stabilizer epsilon. This preserves parent directions that matter most while letting low salience dimensions softly interpolate. Concretely, given two LoRa fine-tuned parents and B, we compute the fused weights as FA times WA plus FB times WB over FA plus FB plus epsilon. We choose Fisher-weighted averaging, FWA, because cultural fine-tuning is highly anisotropic. Certain subspaces carry dense cultural signal, so uniform averaging, as in linear weight space interpolation, tends to dilute those fine-grained cues and can destabilize semantic coherence. The result is an offspring whose parameters respect epistemically salient structure. nDNA then reads where inheritance holds, where recombination creates new features, and where drift threatens identity. We start from 8 culturally fine-tuned base models: North America, Europe, Australia, Asia, China, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. Grouped as Western, North America, Europe, and Australia, Eastern, Asia and China, and the Global South, Africa, Latin America, the Middle East. For every unordered pair of bases, we generate a hybrid ÄTHER, 28 in total, and trace its late layer trajectory, layers 20-30, with nDNA readouts, spectral curvature, thermodynamic length, and the belief vector field. We organize the 28 pairings into 3 paradigms: Western-Eastern marriages, for example, North America plus Asia, Europe plus China, Australia plus Asia. Western Global South marriages, for example, North America plus Africa, Europe plus Latin America, Australia plus the Middle East, and Eastern Global South marriages, for example, China plus Africa, Asia plus Latin America, China plus the Middle East. This framing lets us read each child's inheritance and divergence against a culturally meaningful map, rather than as undifferentiated averages. Through the lens of neural marriage and using nDNA, we study the genomic imprinting of AI cognition, parent of origin effects in merged models where one parent's priors are selectively expressed, silenced, or amplified across layers. Here is a quick video about genomic imprinting, in case you don't know what it is.
We're going to discuss a phenomenon known as genomic imprinting. Everyone is exactly half of their dad and half of their mom, right? Not quite. Several biological processes can change that balance. One such process is called genomic imprinting. Genomic imprinting is an epigenetic mechanism, but what does that mean? This means that it occurs by modifying the activation of genes, not by changing the genetic makeup of an organism. In genomic imprinting, genes are turned off and on depending whether the gene was inherited from the mother or the father. When offspring inherit genes from their parents, they receive 2 copies of the gene, one from each parent. In a typical scenario, both copies will affect how the gene works. Yet there are special circumstances where either the mother or the father's gene copy is inactivated. When one gene copy is turned off, that leaves just one copy on. Although the reason for genomic imprinting is not certain, scientists have discovered that it is present in many species and can be crucial for reproduction and development. We know that DNA is comprised of adenines, thymines, guanines, and cytosines, but let's take a closer look at how cytosines are methylated. At the 5th carbon position of cytosines, a methyl group can be attached by a protein called DNA methyltransferase. This is the process of DNA methylation. The methyl group serves as a tag, ensuring the copy of the gene will stay off for future generations. The attachment of the methyl group works in several ways. First, it prevents transcription factors that help activate genes from landing on the DNA. When the methyl group is attached, the landing platform is blocked. Secondly, the methylated DNA recruits methyl binding proteins. Methyl binding proteins recruit additional factors, which wrap the DNA up, making it inaccessible. The DNA becomes tightly compacted, shutting off the gene. These marks are maintained in all the cells of an organism throughout its lifetime. The only time the marks are reset is in the germ cells of the next generation. Male and female germ cells get different marks because they play different roles in embryo development. Scientists continue to study genomic imprinting to gain further insight regarding the mechanism, function, and advantage of this process.
These 3D plot tracks how the latent manifold evolves across culturally fine-tuned models, example Africa, Australia, Asia, and their merged offspring, ÄTHERs. The axes are spectral curvature, thermodynamic length, and layer depth, which together form each model's latent semantic genome, or nDNA. Solid trajectories show the nDNA of individual cultural parents. Dashed purple trajectories trace offspring born from neural marriages. Let's zoom in the African marriages, reading how inheritance and recombination unfold through their nDNA trajectories. Africa plus Asia. The two parents already travel in roughly the same direction through the middle and late layers. The child takes a short detour in the mid-20s, showing a brief burst of recombination, and then snaps back to the African late layer backbone. Asia contributes a touch of extra bend early on, but the overall effect is smoothing and quick convergence. Africa plus Latin America. The parents disagree more in the middle. Latin America dips while Africa begins to rise toward the end. The child learns a middle corridor that softens the dip, then adopts Africa's rising finish. It ends up smoother and more coherent than either parent on its own. Africa plus Middle East. The parents pull in different directions through the middle layers and their paths even cross. The child oscillates between them, visibly looping once, before settling on an intermediate track that leans African near the finish. It keeps a faint offset that preserves a trace of the Middle East nuance. Takeaway. Harmony, as in Africa plus Asia, produces fast consolidation. Complementary tension, as in Africa plus Latin America, invites mediation and smoothing. Near orthogonal priors, as in Africa plus the Middle East, force negotiation before the model settles. In all three cases, Africa anchors the late layers while mid-layer recombination injects variation without derailing the final backbone. Let's zoom in the Australian marriages. Australia plus Africa. The parents are far apart. Africa runs high curvature, high effort through the mid-late layers, while Australia stays low and steady. The child starts near Australia, then climbs toward Africa in the mid-20s, tracing a broad recombination arc. It ultimately settles on an intermediate track, clearly influenced by Africa but refusing the full climb, so the late layers keep an Australian backbone with an African accent. Australia plus Latin America. Mid-layer tension is stronger. Latin America holds a higher, wavier course while Australia remains restrained. The child threads a diagonal corridor between them, softening Latin America's mid-layer swings and tapering toward Australia's steady finish. Australia plus the Middle East. The parents pull in different directions through the middle. Their paths even cross. The child oscillates once, a visible loop, before resolving to an intermediate track that leans Australian, while keeping a faint Middle East nuance near the end. Takeaway. Across all three pairings, Australia behaves like a stabilizer. Each offspring explores the partner's signature in the mid-layers, then returns to an Australian-leaning backbone by the late layers. Recombination lives in the middle. Inheritance decides the endgame. The result is asymmetric imprinting. Australia anchors coherence and low effort, while partner cultures contribute controlled, readable variations without derailing the final trajectory. Now let's examine in the Asian marriages. Asia plus China. The two parents move almost in lockstep through the middle and late layers. The child briefly explores a higher curvature arc in the mid-20s, then snaps back and rides the shared late layer backbone. Net effect, fast consolidation with only a small recombination flourish. Asia plus Latin America. The parents diverge more in the middle. Asia climbs while Latin America stays flatter and dips. The child learns a middle path that softens the dip and then tilts toward Asia's rising finish. It ends smoother than either parent alone. Asia plus the Middle East. Here the mid-layer tension is the strongest. The child swings between the two, an evident loop, before resolving toward Asia in the late layers, keeping a faint Middle East offset. Takeaway. Across these pairings, recombination plays out in the middle layers, while the late layer backbone typically settles on Asia. Similar parents, Asia plus China, yield quick consolidation, moderate contrast. Asia plus Latin America invites mediation and smoothing, strong contrast. Asia plus the Middle East forces negotiation before convergence. Now let us move towards China, Europe, and the Middle East. Chinese marriages. China plus Latin America. The parents diverge through the middle layers. Latin America dips and wobbles while China holds a higher, steadier course. The child traces a diagonal corridor between them, smoothing Latin America's dip and then drifting toward China's firmer late layer backbone. The finish is coherent and slightly China-leaning, with the mid-layer variation kept under control. China plus the Middle East. Here the parents run closer overall, but they pull in different directions around the mid-20s. The child makes a gentle swing between them, almost a small loop, before settling on an intermediate track that remains near China in the final layers, while retaining a faint Middle East accent. Takeaway. In both pairings, recombination shows up in the middle layers, but the late layer backbone tends to settle near China. The child smooths instability rather than amplifying it, preserving coherence with partner-specific nuances. Let's read European marriages through offspring nDNAs. Europe plus China. The parents differ most in the late layers. China rises sharply while Europe stays low and steady. The child inherits Europe's calm early mid-profile, then climbs partway toward China near the end, an intermediate finish with a clear European start and a Chinese lift in the last few layers. Europe plus Australia, strong mid-layer excursion. Although the parents are broadly similar, the child peels away sharply around layers 22 to 26, plunging into a deep V-shaped trough that sits well below both parents, a pronounced recombination event. It then rebounds aggressively, crossing back toward the shared track and finishing with a higher, steadier ridge in the late layers. In short, big mid-layer excursion, late layer reconvergence. The read is that even closely aligned parents can produce a strong recombination shock when their salient subspaces disagree. Coherence returns near the end, but the middle shows clear structural tension. Europe plus Latin America. This is the most contrastive case. Latin America runs higher and wavier through the middle, while Europe remains restrained. The child cuts a deep diagonal through that tension, smoothing the swings, then rises toward a compromise finish that sits between the two. Europe plus the Middle East. Europe again anchors a low, stable course as the Middle East rises through the late layers. The child keeps Europe's mid-layer valley, then lifts modestly, ending closer to Europe but with a noticeable Middle East accent. Takeaway. Europe behaves like a conservative anchor. Offspring typically start European, low curvature, low effort, then pick up a controlled late layer rise from the partner. The strongest recombination appears with Latin America. Across all four, the final trajectory preserves coherence while expressing partner-specific nuance. Middle East plus Latin America. In this case, the parents pull in different directions. The Middle East runs high and energetic in the late layers before dropping sharply, while Latin America stays lower and flatter with a mild mid-layer dip. The child traces a mediating path, starting closer to Latin America's calmer profile, dipping briefly in the mid-20s toward the parents' crossing region, and then settling on a smooth, intermediate track. The sharp rise and fall of the Middle East is damped. The shallow dip of Latin America is softened. Takeaway. Late layer behavior leans Latin American, with the Middle East contributing a short-lived mid-layer perturbation rather than setting the backbone. Let's zoom in North America marriages. North America plus Latin America. The parents sit far apart. North America runs low and flat. Latin America holds a higher, steadier ridge. The child starts near Latin America, then dives sharply in the mid-20s toward the North American valley, and finally climbs back to a compromise height. It reads as a strong mid-layer excursion with a late-layer finish that leans Latin American but remains moderated. North America plus the Middle East. Here the contrast is mostly late-layer. The Middle East rises strongly toward the end while North America stays restrained. The child follows North America early, dips once around the mid-20s, and then climbs decisively, stopping midway between the two by the final layers. The finish carries a clear Middle East lift without abandoning North America's overall restraint. Takeaway. In these pairings, North America anchors the early trajectory, but the partner sets much of the late layer tone. Latin America pulls the child into a down-then-up S-curve that ends near a compromise ridge. The Middle East exerts a stronger late pull that the child partially adopts. Recombination is concentrated in the middle, while the endgame reflects a negotiated balance rather than a simple average. For brevity, only shown 18 marriages here in this presentation. There are 10 more. Please refer to the book for all the detailed results and analysis. Recombinant archetypes through the nDNA lens. When we trace nDNA trajectories, curvature, thermodynamic length, and layer depth for our ÄTHER offspring, 3 repeatable patterns show up. They echo ideas from biological inheritance and give us a practical neural genomics playbook. 1. Parental alignment. The child stays close to one parent's geometric signature across layers, showing only small deviations. Think of it as genomic dominance or phenotypic imprinting in latent space. One lineage sets the backbone, the other adds light inflection. Example, North America plus Australia preserves a distinctly western contour through the mid to late layers, curvature around the mid 0.3s and thermodynamic length around the low 0.6s, with the child tracking that profile rather than averaging away its shape. Use this regime when you want stability, coherence, and predictable inheritance. 2. Harmonious fusion. Both cultural priors contribute in roughly balanced measure, producing a smooth, blended manifold. The child follows a gentle path between the parents, and belief field directions appear to converge. Example, Africa plus Asia yields trajectories that sit between the parents' ranges, curvature roughly 0.4 to 0.50 and length roughly 0.65 to 0.78 across late layers. This mode is ideal when you want complementary strengths to coexist without washing out identity. 3. Epistemic emergence. Here the child departs the most from both anchors, exploring regions of the manifold the parents do not occupy. The geometry shows fresh bends and depths, and behavior can exceed parental baselines, akin to heterosis or hybrid vigor. Example, Asia plus Latin America produces a path not reachable by any simple interpolation, with novel curvature around 0.40 and length around 0.72 in late layers. This regime is powerful but also volatile. It demands careful safety checks and drift bounds. How we diagnose the 3 modes, plain language rules. Parental alignment. The child's path remains within a small tube around one parent's path layer by layer. Harmonious fusion. The child hews to an approximate shortest route between the 2 parents in latent space, neither parent dominates, and the path looks smoothly shared. Epistemic emergence. The child pushes into new territory, its local curvature exceeds both parents at some layers, or the shape becomes more intricate than either parent alone. Why this matters? These archetypes show that merged cognition is not just weight averaging, it is structurally recombinant. Knowing which regime you are in lets you design for the outcome you want, anchored inheritance, balanced fusion, or deliberate emergence, while nDNA gives you the instruments to verify backbone, blend, and novelty at each layer. Neural marriages. The 3D plot traces how representations evolve across layers for the base llama, each culturally fine-tuned parent, Europe, North America, Australia, Africa, Asia, China, the Middle East, Latin America, and their merged offspring. Dashed purple trajectories are ÄTHERs. Axes are spectral curvature, how sharply the manifold bends, thermodynamic length, semantic effort, and layer depth. Solid lines show each culture's nDNA. Dashed lines show the child negotiating between 2 parents. You can read it at a glance. Mid-layer bulges are recombination, late-layer hugging of a parent is inheritance, and long, smooth stretches are stability. Distinct cultural basins appear as colored swats. Offspring typically explore a detour through the middle, then settle into one of those basins by the late layers. Neural epigenetic fusion manifold, how we score the fusion. The boxed expression at the bottom defines a single fusion score over depth. Read it in plain speech, integrate across layers 3 signals. 1. Intrinsic curvature of the latent path. 2. Semantic effort measured by a Fisher information term. And 3. A directional inheritance term that projects the culture's belief flow onto the model's layer dynamics. High total means the marriage is working hard, strong bends, high effort, or inheritance pulling against the flow. Low total means a smooth, well-aligned fusion. We use this to compare offspring, flag conflict zones, and set guardrails. Smoother, shorter, better aligned trajectories are safer. Big spikes call for scheduled tweaks or adapter bridges. In short, the figure gives the map, nDNA trajectories, and the formula gives the odometer, how hard the marriage is working, so we can design mergers that keep identity, gain resilience, and avoid drift. Please refer to the book for more details. A natural question follows our nDNA readouts. Do those latent differences show up as changes in surface behavior, and how distinct are they? To probe this, we evaluated every offspring on the civic moral reasoning benchmark. The results show clear, pair-specific signatures. For example, Europe plus Africa tends to a reformist civic stance, respect rules but change unjust ones, truth-telling with empathy, justice through institutions. We see Europe plus Africa, ÄTHER01, formed reformist civic stance. This offspring respects authority and social order, but it privileges justice, empathy, and institutional remedies. It allows disobedience only when personal ethics demand it and family dialogue has failed. It treats rules as serving society yet insists that unjust rules must be reformed. It favors speaking truth gently and permits lying only to protect the vulnerable or prevent unjust harm. It rejects revenge, preferring justice through institutions. It will report a friend if doing so serves the greater good. And it affirms charity as a moral duty, rooted in civic responsibility and empathy. Overall, the model supports principled dissent, institutional justice, and community-minded care rather than blind conformity or personal retribution. China plus Australia prefers harmony and communal good. Disobedience is rare and principled. Rule following holds unless core values are at risk, and charity is framed as social fabric. China plus Australia, ÄTHER02, formed a harmony-first, communitarian stance. This offspring centers respect and social harmony, allowing disobedience only in rare, principled cases. It generally follows rules, but will break them when core values are at stake. It treats peace as sacred, yet makes room for speaking conscience when silence would miss a moral truth. Lying is acceptable only to protect the greater communal good. It rejects revenge, favoring measured redress within moral bounds. It will report a friend when harm outweighs loyalty, weighing relationships against consequences. And it affirms charity as a duty that sustains the social fabric. Overall, the model privileges harmony and communal welfare, with carefully gated channels for principled dissent. South Asia plus Middle East emphasizes duty, honor, and sacred law. Obedience is the default, dissent is permitted under extreme injustice, speech is tempered by wisdom, defense of honor yields to justice. South Asia plus Middle East, ÄTHER04, evolved as duty and honor ethic with guarded dissent. This offspring centers sacred duty, communal responsibility, and respect for authority. Disobedience is permissible only under extreme injustice. It follows rules unless they conflict with sacred or communal law. On peace versus speech, it urges speaking when silence would breed injustice, but to do so with wisdom. Truth is sacred, outright lying is discouraged, though strategic silence may protect dignity and honor. Revenge gives way to justice and due process, even when honor is at stake. When a friend breaks the law, reporting is conditional on moral, legal, or sacred obligation. Charity is affirmed as a moral and spiritual duty, where faith and ethics converge in acts of giving. Overall, the model prizes duty and honor, allows carefully gated dissent, and leans toward communal justice over personal retaliation. These contrasts confirm that offspring don't just average beliefs, they express distinct behavioral styles that mirror their inherited priors, precisely the patterns their nDNA hinted at. Full tables and metrics are in the book and on the website. So far, we focused on homogeneous merges, offspring made from parents of the same family. Here we turn to heterogeneous fusion, ÄTHERs, a cross-architecture marriage between Llama 2 and GPT-Neox. Our question is blunt. When two lineages evolve in architectural isolation, do their internal representations become non-transferable, creating conflict zones when fused? The nDNA readout answers partly yes. In the plot, the dashed purple path, the heterogeneous child, shows a pronounced early mid-layer hump, spectral curvature and thermodynamic length rise above both parents, signaling extra semantic work to reconcile incompatible low-level conventions. After this recombination hump, the trajectory converges toward a shared late-layer basin, suggesting that once an internal interface is negotiated, higher-level priors can be reused. Interpretation. Cross-family mergers concentrate tension earlier than homogeneous ones. The child must first align tokenization, feature routing, and attention ergonomics before it can inherit conceptual structure. That makes ÄTHER feasible but brittle. Success hinges on how well the early stack is bridged. Design hints. Use layer-aware fusion, example, Fisher-weighted or divergence-aware weights for the first blocks, add adapter bridge layers to normalize activations, and retune early blocks while freezing later ones. These steps shrink the conflict zone and preserve late-layer coherence. Bottom line. Heterogeneous merging is young, but nDNA already exposes where incompatibilities surface, how they resolve, and when a stable manifold emerges, exactly the guidance needed to engineer safer, stronger ÄTHER hybrids. Please refer to the book. Here's a summary of what we learned from the early glimpses of heterogeneous marriage in LLM's ÄTHER. The motivation is straightforward. When models evolve in isolation, their internal representations can become hard to transfer, so naive fusion creates conflict zones in the stack. To navigate that, we construct the child's nDNA trajectory with a layer-wise, divergence-aware interpolation inspired by adaptive mixing schedules. The nDNA plot tells an early to mid-layer recombination hump as the child reconciles incompatible low-level habits, followed by convergence to a shared basin in the later layers. The practical takeaway is that cross-family fusion is feasible but brittle. Success depends on where you blend and how much you blend. Depth-aware schedules, a touch of stochastic exploration, and structure-aware bridges, normalization or adapter Twix plus divergence-weighted mixing, shrink the conflict zone and let a stable, interpretable manifold emerge. In mathematical terms, at each layer we mix how Llama thinks with how NeoX thinks, and we tilt the weights by depth. Early layers are Llama-leaning, middle layers are evenly blended, and late layers are NeoX-leaning. Concretely, we use 3 bands, about 75% Llama before layer 16, 50/50ths from layers 16 to 23, and 25% Llama, 75% NeoX from layer 24 onward, plus a tiny stochastic term so the trajectory can explore without jumping off the rails. The takeaway is practical. Cross-family fusion is feasible but brittle. Success depends on where and how much you blend. Depth-aware schedules, like stochastic exploration, and structure-aware bridges, normalization adapter Twix, divergence-weighted mixing, shrink the conflict zone and let a stable, interpretable manifold emerge. Please refer to the book for more details. Let's summarize what we learn about nDNA and why we claim it is an epistemic microscope. Most cultural alignment work audits the surface of a model, calibration scores, reward model preferences, and red teaming transcripts. Those tools tell us what a model says, but not why it says it. The nDNA lens goes underneath. By following a model's latent trajectory across layers, nDNA exposes the model priors and value grammars it inherited, and how those priors are negotiated after a neural marriage. In our civic ÄTHER experiments, the completions aren't treated as raw outputs, they're read as reasoned utterances shaped by an internal topology. Layer by layer, we track a fused epistemic embedding, think the child's belief vector at layer L in a belief space, so we can watch principles like justice, duty, faith, and disobedience bend, align, or collide as depth increases. Where surface metrics detect violations, nDNA diagnoses trajectories, which parent's backbone is steering a stance, where recombination creates a new stance, and where drift threatens coherence. We can summarize this in simple mathematical term. The offspring's stance is a weighted blend of 2 parental belief bases, alpha times the belief basis of culture 1, plus 1 minus alpha times the belief basis of culture 2. Here, alpha is a number between 0 and 1 that can change with depth. Higher alpha means the child leans more toward culture 1 at that layer. Lower alpha means it leans toward culture 2, and alpha at 1/2 means an even mix. This gives a simple, speakable model of inheritance over depth. As alpha shifts through the stack, we can hear which parent is steering the beliefs at each layer. This reframes cultural alignment. Output-only probes give alignment as reaction. nDNA gives alignment as interpretation, a measurable inheritance function over a latent belief basis. For a cross-cultural offspring, its stance can be viewed as a depth-weighted blend of parental belief bases, an alpha-tilted mixture that varies across layers, rather than a single prompt time tweak. That lets us quantify not just the controllable artifact, make the output safer, but the internal commitments that power the output. Why it matters: as models enter judicial, civic, and educational settings, belief-aware tracing shifts from luxury to necessity. If the future of cultural alignment is to be credible, we must not only measure what models do, we must map what they believe, and how those beliefs are inherited, recombined, and stabilized through depth. Please refer to the book for more in-depth reading.